There's a big red button here which reads, quote, "Do not press under any circumstances." I mean, come on, that's too obvious. The button's gotta have some special purpose, like unlocking a secret passage, or providing a special item, which, nope, no, never mind. It really does just nuke everything in a 5-mile radius. Good thing I saved first. Welcome to Season 8 of Ancient DOS Games, everyone. Now let's completely ruin everything by riffing on a beloved game for the next 20-something minutes. Okay, I'm being a little facetious here, but anyone who's been following my ADG exploits for a while now knows that I'm not a huge fan of this game, as my experiences with the NES version from childhood were less than ideal, and had left me with the impression that the game was secretly on a time limit, a feature I disdain having to deal with in games about puzzle solving. But I wanted to start the year off strong with a well-known game, so decided to give it another shot, this time with the DOS version. And I can now safely say that the game is not on a timer. But I understand why my younger self thought it was, and it's not a simple explanation. You see, Maniac Mansion was breaking new ground when it was first released, as most inventory-based adventure games up to that point were either text adventures or were made by Sierra, specifically King's Quest and Space Quest. Maniac Mansion took that same formula pioneered by Sierra and ran a different way with it, instead producing an adventure which was a lot more freeform, with multiple ways it could be concluded, giving you a list of actions to choose from, as opposed to making the player guess at what actions they could perform, and having events happen in the background as you are in the midst of solving everything. As such, this game does a lot of things right, and because there's many ways to play it with multiple potential outcomes, it's no wonder it was as well received as it was. Here's the thing though, the reality of this game is that it's incredibly short and glitchy. Once you know the basics of how to complete a run through the game, that's when its real enjoyment opens up, allowing you to experiment with taking different kids into the mansion and finding different ways of reaching the end of the experience. But until you know how to complete a run, it is far too easy to enter unwinnable states without the game so much as telling you, which, yeah, par for the course for this point in gaming history, but the longer the game goes for, the more likely you're going to encounter one of its many glitches. For instance, here I am, ready to restore power to the house after shutting it off to fix some wires, but as I'm trying to click on the right things, all of a sudden a timed cutscene begins playing. Yet this cutscene is supposed to look like this, but is instead happening while the power is out. And then once the cutscene ends, I not only get caught, but upon attempting to restore power, the breakers no longer work properly, and the house goes thermonuclear. Another glitch which happened during one of my runs, which I didn't manage to capture footage of, was where I'd pulled up the save load screen, but for some curious reason, the save option was missing. So I left the screen, and all of a sudden I was returned to the kid selection screen? Yeah, I was about halfway through the game, and then the engine just forgot I was in the middle of a game and sent me back to the start of the program. But I also finally figured out the glitch I encountered as a kid, which made me think the game was on a time limit. Once you break into the secret lab and get into the final minute of gameplay, the engine disables access to the save load screen. The glitch I encountered as a kid in the NES version was shortly after the final timed cutscene played, indicating that the damsel in distress, Sandy, was moments from having her brain sucked out, and what the glitch did was effectively turn the save load access into a freaking time bomb. Basically, I continued playing, and the moment I tried to go for the save load screen, despite not being far enough in the game to get it disabled, I got the "no saved games" message. But worse than that, every single attempt to press the A button on the controller was just generating that message again, effectively making it impossible to continue playing. The fundamental glitch in pretty much all ports of this game is that the game's internal scripting system gets confused when cutscenes attempt to play while other actions are in the middle of being performed. Usually not leading to much of anything, but sometimes leading to all sorts of unintended and undefined behavior, like the glitches I just described. And since these cutscenes occur without warning based on timers which start in the background after you perform certain actions, it's no wonder my younger self thought the game was on a time limit. It does make me wonder too if playing the game using the ScumVM emulator gets around these glitches or not. But that's not something I felt like trying to investigate, though feel free to leave a comment if you know any definitive information related to any of that. Well, this game's already giving my new ADG interface a workout. In any case, Maniac Mansion was originally released on the Commodore 64 and Apple II computers back in 1987, with the original DOS port following in 1988, which I'm showing some gameplay of now, while an enhanced version was released in 1989 with updated graphics and audio, which is the version I'll be playing for all other parts of this review, simply because it plays better overall. All releases of the game were made and published by Lucasfilm Games prior to their name change to LucasArts, and are all one-player, inventory-based adventure games. In terms of graphics, this is a little complicated, so bear with me. Both the original and enhanced versions support Hercules monochrome graphics through an internal upscaler to 720 by 348, given that all of the graphics are primarily made for 320 by 200 resolution, with the other supported video modes for both versions being CGA 4-color, Tandy 16 color, EGA 16 color, and MCGA 256 color, though the MCGA mode is referred to by the game as VGA mode, and doesn't actually use 256 colors, or do any palette alterations of any kind. It just looks like the EGA mode, and it's primarily present for compatibility reasons, since MCGA chipsets are not compatible with EGA standards. Beyond that though, the original version of the game lacks support for Tandy 320 by 200 graphics, while instead providing support for two video modes the enhanced version does not. CGA 640 by 200 monochrome graphics, which simply downconverts the graphics into patterns of black and white pixels, similar to the Hercules support, and Tandy 160 by 200 16 color graphics. Yeah, the original's Tandy support utilizes its much lower resolution, which looks correct when compared to 320 by 200 when viewed on a composite display, as not all Tandy computer users had RGB monitors. That said, the game is mistakenly said to have composite CGA support. However, not only will DOSBox not automatically engage composite CGA output, but if you force the issue, it simply does not look right. Not in the original and not in the enhanced version. Thus, I think it's safe to say composite CGA output is not actually supported by this game. In terms of audio, this is much simpler as both games only support the PC speaker and the Tandy 3 voice chipset, and naturally sounds way better in the Tandy mode. As for its current release date, the game's still commercial, and the simplest way to get a copy nowadays is through GOG or Steam, as it's $6 on both sites, and you get both the original and enhanced versions with your purchase. However, if you want a physical copy, well, I've got bad news, and more bad news, as well as one piece of debatably good news. So to get all of the bad news out of the way, this game got caught up into speculator nonsense worse than most other PC titles, partly fueled by the fact that Limited Run Games did their own boxed re-release of this title just a couple years ago back in 2023. Thus, when you go searching for physical copies of this game, you're going to notice the DOS version is extremely rare compared to all other ports. It's incredibly difficult to search for because so many of the listings are not only for the LRG re-release, but also because the words Maniac Mansion are in the title for the sequel, Day of the Tentacle, so you end up pulling up listings for both games to sort through, and it's ludicrously expensive when you do find copies, as the cheapest loose discs I found for the game, which actually got sold, were $60, with some people happily paying well into the hundreds for fully boxed copies, and sealed copies sometimes even cross into 4 freaking digits. Not to mention, even if you do locate a copy of the DOS game, now you're stuck trying to figure out if it's the original or the enhanced version. Well, if there's a shot of the back of the box that you're getting, then that'll give it away because it's completely different between the two releases. But if all you have to go on are a shot of the discs, you need to look for a copyright. If you see a 1989 copyright anywhere, it's the enhanced version, otherwise it's the original version. All of that said, the NES version is the most common by far. Thus, if you want a physical copy of the game and don't care what system it's for, that's your best bet, as NES copies typically go for around $20 loose and $60 fully boxed. The good news, though, is that the game also comes free with the sequel, Day of the Tentacle, and that game is a lot easier to get loose physical copies of. But it's important to note that the copy of the game which comes with Day of the Tentacle was never meant to be played outside of Day of the Tentacle itself, nor was it ever meant to be played through to completion. To do so, you first have to rename one of the files into a .exe file. It'll be obvious which one needs to be renamed. And even after you do that, you're not only going to discover it's the original version of the game, not the enhanced version, but all of its Tandy character assets are corrupted, making the game borderline unplayable if you want to also have the better 3-voice audio. Well, when it comes down to it, physical copies of this game are just not worth the hassle of obtaining if all you want to do is play it, especially when you consider there's copy protection involved as well. No need to dedicate a full section of the video to the story because, quite frankly, it's super simple. A scientist by the name of Dr. Fred, who resides with his wife and son in a remote mansion, has kidnapped a woman by the name of Sandy for reasons which are not explicitly explained, though apparently has something to do with sucking her brains out, metaphorically. Unfortunately, Sandy's boyfriend Dave is on the case and manages to rope in 2 of his 6 friends to follow him to the mansion in an attempt to break in and rescue Sandy before the Mad Doctor's plans come to fruition. Though it becomes pretty obvious before too long that Dr. Fred is not acting of his own volition, as being mind-controlled by a sentient meteor which crashed near the place not long prior, as shown in the introduction sequence for the game. Now, this immediately leads us into one of the core features of the game, in that you're not just playing as Dave, you also have to pick 2 of his friends to come with him on this mission, who you will also play as and swap between at will, each of whom has a unique trait to take advantage of in order to clear the game. These friends are Sid, whose unique skill is music, Michael, whose unique skill is photography, Wendy, whose unique skill is writing, Bernard, whose unique skill is electronics, Razor, who shares Sid's unique skill of music, and Jeff, whose unique skill is surfing, and otherwise doesn't bring anything more to the adventure than Dave himself. Which is hilarious. When you bring Jeff to the pool and he refuses to get in because it's full of water, despite being in the water literally being his forte. The trick, though, is that because you have to pick 2 additional kids to go to the mansion with Dave, it is not possible to pick a combination which cannot win the game, since every character except Dave and Jeff has the necessary skills to bring about an ending of some kind all by themselves. Now that said, you absolutely want Bernard and Michael with you if this is your first time playing, since the remaining 3 kids, Sid, Wendy, and Razor, can all become unwinnable in a heartbeat, unlike Bernard and Michael, who don't have any unusually tricky things to worry about. Now that said, you don't need both of them. So long as one of your party members is Bernard or Michael, it'll be harder to enter an unwinnable state. While the game can be controlled entirely with the keyboard or even with a joystick, chances are you're going to want to use a combination of the keyboard and a mouse. At the bottom of the screen are 15 different actions you can perform. Push, pull, give, open, close, read, walk to, pick up, what is, unlock, new kid, use, turn on, turn off, and fix. Most of these are self-explanatory, but a few of them are a little less obvious. Walk to is the default action, which has your character walk to wherever you click. What is a special mode which allows the cursor to tell you what it's over top of, as normally the game doesn't automatically do this, despite the fact the NES port does, as do practically all other subsequent games using the SCUM engine. While the new kid command simply allows you to switch which kid you're playing as out of the 3 that you've selected for the current run. However, because you sometimes need to hunt around for stuff in total darkness, and because you need to click on things twice to confirm your action selections, it's a good idea to learn to use the keyboard shortcuts as soon as you can. Now, because the commands are laid out in a 5x3 grid at the bottom of the screen, you can access each of these commands immediately simply by treating the left side of your keyboard as a 5x3 grid, with QWERT for the top row of commands, ASDFG for the middle row, and ZXCVB for the bottom row. Though I have no idea if this is handled correctly on an AZERTY keyboard compared to a QWERTY keyboard. Regardless, because using the keyboard shortcuts allows you to instantly change from the what is cursor mode to another, it makes it much simpler to find and click on things. Now also keep in mind that the tiniest objects in the game actually require the cursor to be slightly higher up the screen than you'd expect necessary to be able to select them. Plus, you can use the F1, F2, and F3 keys to instantly switch between kits. Now once you break into the mansion and start exploring, sooner or later you'll get your first taste of a cutscene. There's a few of these sprinkled throughout the experience, but the thing is, you're never going to be exactly sure when these cutscenes are going to take place, because the timers which tell them when to start are keyed to the player doing specific things within the mansion. And generally speaking, the more cutscenes you see, the deeper you're getting into the experience. And because each individual cutscene has its own timer, they can sometimes happen in a different order in subsequent playthroughs. However, an important point of note about these cutscenes is that they frequently also involve the mansion's inhabitants moving throughout. Thus, if one of your kids happens to be in a room or hallway which someone else is transiting through to get to their destination, they'll find the kid and capture them, locking them in the dungeon in the basement. Unfortunately, there's a couple ways out of the dungeon if you do find yourself in there. One of the bricks in the wall is loose, and pushing it will open the door and allow escape, if you keep holding the brick. Thus, this method of escape only works if 2 or 3 kids are in the dungeon, as at least 1 kid must be left behind in this event. However, there's also an old rusty key in a chandelier on the main floor, and if you can find a way to get that key, it opens the dungeon door and will make it possible to have all of your kids escape easily enough. Or even go back in once you're ready to enter the secret laboratory, since the entrance to it is actually in the dungeon, which seems kinda like a really bad idea, but then I'm not a mad scientist, so what do I know? As you make your way around the mansion, collecting items and figuring out the ridiculous state everything has sort of been left in, sooner or later you're going to hear the doorbell, and it wasn't you who rang it. Now, this is a key point of progression, whereby if you don't have Bernard or Michael in your party and you're not ready with a kid at the front of the house, you are mere moments from entering an unwinnable state. Dr. Fred's son, Weird Ed, is waiting for a commando package to be delivered. Thus, when the doorbell rings, he thinks it's his package, so he goes to answer the door. However, when the doorbell rings without your assistance, it's because the package actually has been delivered, and it is vital that you intercept this package before Weird Ed gets it. Otherwise, unless you have Bernard or Michael in your party, you are not making it to the end of this game. In fact, even after you get the package, if you immediately deliver it to Weird Ed, you will still enter an unwinnable state. This is because 2 of the objects needed to clear the game with Sid, Razor, or Wendy skills are stamps and an envelope. To get the stamps, you need to try to open the commando package, which will cause some unmarked stamps to fall off. Furthermore, these 3 kids need access to an envelope later into their runs to win the game, but the one and only envelope you can acquire is sealed, and if you just straight up open it, it gets ripped and becomes useless. You have to steam the envelope in a microwave with a glass of water to get it open without damaging it. Otherwise, again, Sid, Razor, and Wendy become unable to clear the game with their skills. Now, all that said, there's a few other spots which may seem unwinnable on the surface, but the reality is, you need to keep that whole transit thing in mind, whereby if the mother of the house, Nurse Edna, or Weird Ed, are off doing something else, that means they're not in their rooms. Thus, sometimes, in order to complete a task which doesn't seem like it could be completed anymore, you need to sacrifice one of the kids to either of these 2 characters, who will then take that kid to the dungeon, but during that trip, they are no longer in their bedrooms, meaning you can move in with a different kid to search and find the things you're looking for. There are less brazen things to try as well, though, as Weird Ed will make for the door when he hears the doorbell if he hasn't yet received his package, and Nurse Edna can be distracted by calling her phone number once you learn it and fix the one and only phone you have access to in the mansion. Actually, speaking of Nurse Edna's phone number, this kind of leads into one of the neat features of the game in that there's a variety of 4-digit codes used over the course of the experience, and these codes are randomly selected per run from a pool of several possibilities. Meaning, once you learn these codes, they won't necessarily help you in later runs, but then on the flip side, I think each thing with a code attached only has about a half dozen possible codes it can choose from, so chances are if you happen to know one of them, you can just attempt it and see what happens. And I suppose it's probably a good idea to mention too that your kids can totally get themselves killed in this game, though there's not actually a lot of ways this can happen. One of the simplest ways is if you drain the pool, have a kid go into the drained pool, then fill the pool back up. For some reason, none of the kids, not even freaking Jeff, can swim, and thus they'll drown. Another simple method is to scoop up some pool water with the glass jar you find, microwave it, then open the microwave, as the pool is being used to cool the nuclear reactor in the house, meaning the water is actually somewhat radioactive, meaning if you turn it into steam in the microwave and let it loose into the room, it instantly ends up frying whoever opened the thing up. You can also get one of your kids killed by stealing Weird Ed's beloved hamster, zapping it in the microwave, and returning the remains to Weird Ed, who will promptly murder said kid. Though because this is kind of a disgusting thing to do, only the more edgy kids are willing to attempt it, and I really don't feel like trying it, let alone showing it. Regardless, if a kid dies, they become a tombstone in the front yard, and if all 3 kids die, it turns into a game over. Also keep in mind too that if a kid dies, their inventory becomes inaccessible for the remainder of the experience. Thus, unless you are intentionally planning to have one of them killed off, losing one of the kids by accident has a pretty high chance of bricking your run then and there. One last thing to keep in mind too is that sometimes you actually need to use the read command to make progress. Now, normally, all the read command does is relay what's written down on or in something, but even if you know what's written down, the kid you're controlling may not. Thus, until you have used the read command to explicitly see what's written down somewhere, the kids may not know what they can do in relation to that piece of info. Overall, Maniac Mansion isn't a bad game by any stretch, but it is fairly short, and if you don't know about the gotchas, which make a run unwinnable, you can end up burning huge amounts of time trying to make progress only to actually be completely shut out from success. Not to mention, you have to be aware the game can glitch out too, thus saving often is a good idea, and if you try to do something and a cutscene interrupts what you're trying to do, reload and try it again, because having a cutscene interrupt an action is typically what causes glitches to occur. Now, once you know how to complete a run through this game is when it opens up, and becomes more enjoyable because of all of the different endings and variations of endings which are possible, but your first time playing without the aid of hints or a walkthrough is probably going to be an exercise in frustration more than anything. Generally speaking, you're probably better off playing LucasArts titles like this one with the ScumVM emulator. Well heck, ScumVM is even named after the Scum engine originally created specifically for this game, as the acronym SCUMM stands for Script Creation Utility for Maniac Mansion. However, if you'd like to play it in DOSBox instead, it's really simple to set up. Just leave cycle set to auto, and make sure to set the machine type to Tandy to get the enhanced audio effects. I should also point out, even though the EGA mode in the original game runs at a higher resolution than the Tandy mode, the graphics are identical between the two, short of the font. So even with the original release, you probably want to stick with the Tandy graphics and audio. Anywho, that'll be all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. Next up, 2 Saturdays from now on January 17th will be another review, episode 352, and we're going to be taking a look at a game which allows you to live out your wildest, most untamed fantasies about commanding an army of insects. Well, at least that's what I think the game's about. I've never actually tried to sit down and play it for any length of time before, so be sure to stay tuned to see how it all goes. Thanks for watching, and extra special thanks to all of my Patreon supporters. Even as little as $1 a month really helps keep things going, so please consider joining these fine folk over at patreon.com/KASICK.